Did you know that the ultimate icon of human intelligence, the man with the most famous crazy hair in the world, Albert Einstein, was once considered a slow, foolish child? He was a guy who ended up unemployed after graduation, absolutely despised wearing socks, and suffered a truly creepy ending where his brain was literally stolen by a rogue doctor and taken on a road trip across America in a glass jar. Welcome everyone to the Past Tense No Sense podcast. Put away your boring history textbooks, pull up a chair, take a deep breath, and imagine you are stepping into a room thick with the smell of chalk dust, the heavy scent of cheap cigars, and the distinct body odor of a genius who firmly said a big, fat no to brushing his hair or wearing socks. Let us wind the clocks back to 1879 in Germany. When we hear the name Einstein today, we immediately think of an absolute genius. But if you met little baby Albert, you probably would not be impressed. In fact, his parents were terrified that he was mentally disabled. Why? Because Albert refused to speak. He did not say a single word until he was about 3 or 4 years old. Rumor has it that his very first sentence was at the dinner table, where he suddenly complained, "The soup is too hot." His shocked parents asked him why he had never spoken before, and little Albert supposedly replied, "Because up to now, everything was in order." Now, whether that specific quote is completely true or just a legendary myth, it perfectly captures his personality. He only spoke when he felt it was absolutely necessary. He was not a fan of small talk. However, there was a spark in him. When he was 5 years old and sick in bed, his father gave him a simple magnetic compass. While most kids would just try to break it or throw it across the room, little Albert was mesmerized. The invisible force making the needle point north completely blew his mind. It was his awakening. He realized there was a hidden world of forces operating behind the scenes, and he desperately wanted to uncover its secrets. But before he could unlock the secrets of the universe, he had to survive high school. Let us clear up the biggest fake news in history right now. Einstein did not fail math. That is a comforting lie that lazy students tell themselves to feel better about their bad grades. He was actually brilliant at math and physics from a very young age. However, he was an absolute nightmare for the traditional German education system. Imagine a school system run exactly like a military boot camp. Teachers demanded absolute obedience, strict rote memorization, and zero independent thinking. You were just supposed to sit there, shut up, and memorize facts. Albert hated this with a burning passion. He called his teachers drill sergeants. He was a rebel who had a severe problem with blind authority. He asked too many questions, he constantly argued with his professors, and he made it very clear that he thought their teaching methods were pure garbage. He famously believed that you should never memorize something that you can easily look up in a book. His attitude was so notoriously bad that one of his teachers told him straight to his face that he would never amount to anything in life. Eventually, he was basically kicked out of his high school in Munich. The headmaster actually told him that his mere presence in the classroom destroyed the respect of the other students. Imagine being so annoyingly smart and rebellious that the school tells you your personal vibe is ruining the discipline of the whole institution. So, what happens to a rebellious genius after he finally manages to graduate from a university in Switzerland? Does he get a prestigious job at a top laboratory? Nope. He gets completely rejected. Not a single professor wanted to hire the arrogant kid who skipped classes and thought he knew better than everyone else. For 2 agonizing years, the man who would soon change the world was basically unemployed, desperately taking weird, low-paying tutoring jobs just to buy food and survive. Finally, a good friend pulled some strings and got him a job as a third-class patent examiner at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Now, picture this scene. It is the early 1900s. Einstein is sitting at a boring wooden desk 8 hours a day, looking at technical blueprints for things like improved gravel sorters or slightly better typewriters. It sounds like a soul-crushing corporate nightmare, right? But for Einstein, it was absolute paradise. The job was so incredibly easy for his massive brain that he could finish his entire day's work in just a few hours. That left him with hours of free time every single day to sit at his desk, stare out the window, and daydream. But he was not daydreaming about his weekend plans or what he was going to eat for dinner. He was daydreaming about riding beams of light through space. He was running wildly complex thought experiments in his head while his boss thought he was just quietly reviewing patents. Einstein was a master of slacking off at work, but he did it in the most productive way in human history. He kept his personal physics notes hidden in his desk drawer. Whenever a supervisor walked by his desk, he would quickly shove the notes away and pretend to be deeply focused on a patent application. That little desk drawer was his secret laboratory, and from that very desk drawer came what historians call the annus mirabilis, or the miracle year of 1905. Let's break down how crazy this miracle year actually was. Imagine a random guy working at the local post office today, suddenly dropping 4 blog posts that prove time travel is real, gravity is an illusion, and aliens are living in our Wi-Fi routers. That is basically what Einstein did to the entire physics community. In just one single year, this 26-year-old patent clerk, who was completely isolated from the academic scientific community, published 4 groundbreaking papers. First, he explained the photoelectric effect, proving that light is made of tiny packets of energy, which eventually won him the Nobel Prize. Second, he mathematically proved that atoms and molecules are real, physical things bumping into each other. Third, he dropped the special theory of relativity, proving that time is not a constant ticking clock for everyone. If you travel faster, time literally slows down for you. And fourth, as the ultimate cherry on top, he introduced mass-energy equivalence with the legendary equation E equals mc squared. He showed that a tiny amount of matter contains a terrifying, explosive amount of energy. He essentially rewrote the fundamental rules of the universe while pretending to work his boring 9-to-5 job. It is the ultimate story of an office worker secretly changing the world while his boss is not looking. But what happens when the world finally realizes what this guy just did? How does a socially awkward patent clerk handle becoming a global superstar, a primary target for the FBI, and an old man whose brain gets stolen and put into a jar? You definitely do not want to miss the rest of this crazy journey. It took the scientific world a little while to catch up to the sheer brilliance of what Einstein had dropped on them. But when they finally did, everything exploded. In 1919, during a solar eclipse, a team of British astronomers took photographs of stars. Their findings proved that Einstein was absolutely right. Massive objects like the sun actually bend the fabric of space and light around them. Overnight, Albert Einstein transformed from an obscure physicist into a global mega celebrity. We are talking about literal A-list rock star status here. Imagine Taylor Swift or Cristiano Ronaldo levels of fame, but for a guy who just did really complicated math. When he traveled, thousands of screaming fans would crowd the streets just to get a glimpse of him. Paparazzi hounded him everywhere. Women swooned over his crazy, unruly hair and those sad, soulful eyes. He was the very first modern intellectual superstar. But being a superstar in the 1930s came with some massive, terrifying problems, especially if you were a Jewish intellectual living in Germany. As the Nazi Party rose to power under Adolf Hitler, Einstein quickly realized that his homeland had become a death trap. His books were thrown into giant public bonfires, and the government actually put a massive cash bounty on his head. So, in 1933, he packed his bags, fled across the ocean, and took a job at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. You would think America would welcome the smartest man alive with open arms, right? Well, the general public definitely did, but the government was extremely paranoid. The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, was absolutely convinced that Einstein was a dangerous, radical communist spy. Why? Because Einstein was a loud, unapologetic pacifist. He openly hated war. He spoke out fiercely against the development of nuclear weapons, even though his own famous equation helped lay the theoretical groundwork for the atomic bomb, a terrifying fact that haunted him until his dying breath. Furthermore, in a deeply segregated America, Einstein actively fought against racism. He joined civil rights groups, walked around black neighborhoods in Princeton to chat with the locals, and famously called racism a disease of white people. To the FBI, a guy fighting for peace and equality sounded incredibly suspicious. So they tapped his phone, opened his private mail, dug through his trash, and compiled a massive, ridiculous secret file on him. They even investigated a wild rumor that he was secretly building a deadly laser beam weapon in his basement. Spoiler alert, they never found a single shred of evidence that he was a spy. They just wasted millions of taxpayer dollars stalking a friendly old man who spent most of his time scribbling equations on chalkboards and playing the violin. As he settled into his later years at Princeton, Einstein fully embraced his weird, eccentric side. He completely stopped caring about normal social rules. This is the era of the classic Einstein look that we all know today. The wildly messy hair that looked like he just survived an electric shock, the oversized baggy sweaters, and, most importantly, his strict, unbreakable rule against wearing socks. He hated socks with a burning passion. He once proudly wrote in a letter to his wife that he had discovered a fundamental truth of the universe. The big toe always makes a hole in the sock. His brilliant scientific solution to this problem? Just stop wearing them entirely. He would show up to fancy high society dinners wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo and bare feet stuffed into old, worn-out shoes. He was the most famous man on Earth, so nobody dared to tell him he looked like a homeless wizard. His reputation as a wise, almost godlike figure reached such a crazy peak that in 1952, the Prime Minister of Israel actually offered him the job of president of the country. Yes, you heard that right. They wanted a theoretical physicist with messy hair to run a whole nation. Einstein politely turned it down. He humbly admitted that he lacked the natural aptitude and the practical experience to deal with actual human beings. He basically told them, "I am really great with numbers, gravity, and the cosmos, but people are way too complicated, emotional, and messy for me to manage." But the craziest, most unbelievable chapter of Einstein's story happened right after he died in 1955 at the age of 76. Einstein was a modest guy. He left strict, very clear instructions for his funeral. He wanted his body cremated immediately and his ashes scattered in a secret, undisclosed location. He specifically did not want a massive grave or a monumental shrine where crazy fans could come and worship his bones like a religious relic. But a pathologist at the Princeton Hospital named Dr. Thomas Harvey had a totally different, highly illegal plan. While performing the autopsy, without getting any permission from Einstein's family or the hospital, Dr. Harvey just decided to casually remove Einstein's brain and take it home. He literally stole the most valuable brain in human history. Harvey was not even a neuroscientist. He was just a regular guy who got incredibly greedy. He was convinced that if he studied it, he could unlock the biological secrets of genius. He took this stolen brain, snapped a bunch of black and white photos of it from every angle, and then sliced it up into 240 little blocks like a loaf of bread. He embedded the pieces in a substance called celloidin, making them look like little yellow cubes of cheese. For decades, Harvey kept pieces of Albert Einstein's brain floating in glass jars full of formaldehyde. Sometimes he stored them in a cider box tucked away under a beer cooler in his office. When Harvey eventually lost his medical license and moved across the country, he packed the brain in his car trunk and took it on a bizarre cross-country American road trip. It took years for the Einstein family to fully realize what had happened, and by then, the crazy doctor had already started mailing little chunks of the brain to random scientists around the world via the regular postal service in mayonnaise jars. So, what can we learn from the wild, totally unpredictable, and slightly disturbing life of Albert Einstein? First of all, if you are currently failing your exams, struggling to find a decent job after graduation, or your boss thinks you are totally lazy, do not panic. You might just be in your own personal incubation period, quietly preparing to unleash your own miracle year on the world. Keep your secret ideas in your desk drawer, ignore the haters, and let your imagination ride those light beams. And secondly, if you are sitting there right now realizing that you are just a little bit too smart for your own good, you might want to call your lawyer right this second and add a very specific clause to your last will and testament. Make sure you strictly forbid any weird hospital doctors from putting your brain into a glass Tupperware container and taking it on a cross-country joyride. Thanks for listening to the Past Tense No Sense podcast. Stay curious, stay weird, and please, wear your socks if it is cold outside.